At 3:26 in the morning, I caught 4 people poisoning my farm. And the woman holding the fuel can looked me straight in the eye and asked what I was doing there. She said it like I had broken into her bedroom instead of pulling into my own driveway. What she did not know was that a retired federal investigator was hidden in the trees, recording every word she said. My name is Nolan Mercer. I was 38 then, and I owned 12 acres outside Briar Glen, North Carolina, a quiet little town where everybody waved from their trucks and somehow still knew your business before you did. I am a soil ecologist, which is a fancy way of saying I spend most of my life studying dirt while people with cleaner boots explain to me that dirt is just dirt. 6 years earlier, I had bought that land for less than the price of a downtown apartment because nobody wanted it. Half the property flooded every spring. The back field was tangled with blackberry vines, and the old barn leaned so far east that birds only built nests on the west side. To me, it was perfect. The soil had a rare combination of clay, decayed hardwood, and natural fungal activity that made it ideal for cultivating medicinal mushrooms and restoring damaged farmland. I spent years rebuilding it, one compost row at a time, until universities were sending interns to study what I had done. Then a developer bought the woods next door, scraped everything flat, and built Maple Crest Reserve, 64 beige houses with matching mailboxes and lawns so perfect they looked afraid to grow. 3 months after the first families moved in, Vivian Crowley knocked on my door. She was the president of their Homeowners Association, a 62-year-old former real estate broker with silver blonde hair, expensive sunglasses, and the permanent expression of someone who had just found a fingerprint on a wine glass. She handed me a blue binder thick enough to stop a small bullet. Community appearance standards, she said. I looked at the binder, then at her, then back at the binder. I think you have the wrong address. She smiled without warmth. Your property borders our community, Mr. Mercer, and your operations affect our values. My operations were 3 greenhouses, a mushroom lab, and a series of covered compost beds. Vivian called them industrial waste piles. I explained that my land was zoned agricultural and had been for decades, that I was not part of Maple Crest, and that the rules had no authority on my side of the fence. She tilted her head and said, "We will see about that." That sentence turned out to be less of a farewell and more of a business plan. First came the noise complaints, even though I never ran equipment before 8 in the morning. Then animal control showed up because somebody reported aggressive dogs roaming my fields. I did not own a dog. The officer found 2 coyotes near the creek, looked at me, and said, "Unless you taught those things to answer to their names, I think you were fine." After that, my roadside sign disappeared. My mailbox got filled with wet concrete, and somebody sprayed perfume around my compost beds before calling the county about chemical odors. Every complaint led to an inspection. Every inspection found nothing. And every time Vivian stood across the road watching like she had purchased tickets. The strangest thing was how personal it became. She did not want the farm cleaned up. She wanted me gone. At one county meeting, she pointed at a photograph of my lower field and said, "This is not agriculture. This is decay." I remember sitting there with my hands folded, because if I had opened them, I might have applauded. I told the board, "Decay is agriculture, Mrs. Crowley. It is also how forests work. But I understand trees are not welcome in Maple Crest unless they are approved in writing." A few people laughed. Vivian did not. That was the night she stopped pretending this was about appearance. Over the next 5 months, she filed reports claiming I was contaminating groundwater with solvents, pesticides, and heavy metals. The county tested my soil twice, then brought in a state environmental officer named Teresa Hall for a 3rd inspection. Teresa spent half a day collecting samples, came back a week later, and told me my land was cleaner than several certified organic farms she had inspected. Vivian was standing close enough to hear it. Her face barely moved, but I saw something settle behind her eyes, something colder than anger. It was calculation. Around that time, my neighbor Walter Keene started paying closer attention. Walter lived west of me in a stone farmhouse hidden behind cedar trees. He was 71, restored antique engines, drank coffee strong enough to remove paint, and had once worked for a federal agency he referred to only as the office. He never bragged about it, which made me believe every vague word. One evening, he came by while I was loading equipment for a soil conference in Savannah. "You leaving tomorrow?" he asked. "Tonight," I said. 6-hour drive, keynote in the morning, hotel until Wednesday. Walter looked toward the gravel road, where a black SUV sat near the trail entrance. That vehicle has been there 3 afternoons this week. Same driver, same binoculars. I laughed because the alternative was admitting I felt uneasy. Maybe Vivian has taken up birdwatching. Walter did not laugh. People who watch birds look up, Nolan. She's been watching your gate. I told him the gate would be chained and the cameras were active, but he said cameras only help when people know where they are pointed. Before I left, he asked me to text when I reached Georgia. I promised I would, then forgot. About 4 hours into the drive, somewhere south of Columbia, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. Walter had sent one sentence. "They are testing the fence." I called him immediately, but he did not answer. I told myself he was being dramatic, that Vivian was annoying but not dangerous, that sane people did not cross from neighborhood politics into criminal sabotage over compost and mushrooms. Then I remembered the look in her eyes outside the county office, and the reasonable part of my brain started losing the argument. I pulled into a gas station, stood beside the truck under those harsh white lights, and felt a pressure in my chest that had nothing to do with caffeine. I canceled the hotel, turned north, and drove home through fog and drizzle with the radio off. When I reached Sprier Glen, I killed my headlights half a mile from the farm and rolled slowly along the shoulder. The front gate was hanging open. The chain had been cut clean through. I eased the truck down the drive without the engine, then turned the key and hit the high beams. Vivian stood in the middle of my lower field holding a yellow fuel can. Beside her, a man from the HOA board was digging near the creek. Another was scattering white crystals over the soil, and a younger guy was filming the mess they had just created. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Vivian lifted her chin, marched toward my truck, and shouted, "You were not supposed to be here." My phone rang before I could answer. Walter was calling from somewhere inside the dark tree line. "Stay in the truck," he whispered. "Let her talk." I had been recording them for 47 minutes. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and lowered the window just far enough to hear her. Cold air rolled into the cab carrying the sharp smell of diesel, wet clay, and something bitter that did not belong in any healthy field. Vivian stopped 10 feet from my door, still holding the fuel can, and somehow managed to look offended. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. I stared at her for a second because there are moments when rage gets so clean and quiet that it feels almost peaceful. "This is my property, Vivian. I think I get to ask that question." She glanced toward the young man with the camera, then raised her voice like she had suddenly remembered she had an audience. "We received an anonymous report of hazardous dumping near the watershed. As officers of the Community Association, we are documenting an imminent public safety threat." The man with the shovel, Grant Holloway, Maple Crest's vice president, nodded too quickly. His loafers were sunk halfway into the mud, and his hands looked like they had never held anything heavier than a restaurant menu. I looked past them toward the creek bank. 2 shallow holes had been cut into the soil, one already shining black with fuel. White salt crystals covered the compost edge, and a torn fertilizer bag lay beside a plastic drum with no label. I knew exactly what they were trying to do. Fuel and salt would kill the microbial layers, damage the fungal beds, and contaminate runoff. If they photographed it carefully and called the right agencies before I could respond, the farm could be quarantined while an investigation dragged on. Even if I was cleared, the cleanup alone could ruin me. Vivian saw the realization land on my face and smiled. "We found all of this when we arrived," she said. "You found it after cutting my chain at 2 in the morning. Emergency access," she snapped. "We have a duty to protect our residents. You do not have residents on my land." She stepped closer. "Your land drains into our community. That gives us standing." "No, it gives you a view of my fence." Grant shifted behind her and muttered, "Vivian, maybe we should wait for counsel." She spun around. "Do not start now." He lowered his voice, but the night carried every word. "You said the county had approved this." Vivian looked back at the camera and spoke through clenched teeth. "The county approved investigation of any immediate hazard." "That was not what you told me," Grant said. "You said we had written authorization." Vivian hissed his name, but it was too late. Walter's voice came to my phone, low and satisfied. "Good, keep her talking." I opened the truck door. "Stay inside," Walter said. "Not yet." I ignored him and stepped into the field because the sight of fuel soaking into 5 years of work was more than I could watch through glass. The younger guy with the camera backed away when I approached. He was maybe 25, with Vivian's narrow face and the nervous eyes of someone who had been told this was a clever favor, not a felony. "Put the camera down," I said. Vivian pointed at me. "Do not interfere with evidence." I looked at the fuel can in her hand. "You are holding the evidence." She lifted it as if she had only just noticed. "We recovered this near the creek." "Then why are your gloves wet with diesel?" That shut her up for half a second. I could hear the drip of water from the sycamores and the faint hum of my truck behind me. Grant took another step back, and the fourth person, a maintenance contractor named Ed Rourke, dropped a bag of rock salt into the mud. I knew Ed. He fixed irrigation lines in Maple Crest and had once helped me move a fallen tree after a storm. Now he looked older than he had that afternoon, shoulders folded inward, face gray under the flood of my headlights. "Nolan," he said quietly, "I did not know it was going to be like this." Vivian turned on him. "Be quiet." Ed looked at the black soil at his feet. "You said we were collecting samples." I said, "Be quiet." There was no fear in her voice, only fury at losing control. That was Vivian's real weakness. She could not imagine anybody around her having a conscience unless she had approved it first. I took out my phone and began recording. Vivian saw it and straightened. "Good," she said. "Record this. Record how an irresponsible agricultural operator threatened community volunteers during a contamination response." I almost laughed. "Volunteers usually bring clipboards?" "Vivian, not bowl cutters and dyed diesel." Her expression changed just a fraction. "How do you know it is dyed?" "Because I work with environmental labs, and because red fuel leaves red stains on white gloves." She looked down before she could stop herself. Grant saw it too. He dropped the shovel. It hit a stone with a metallic crack that made everyone jump. "Vivian," he whispered, "where did you get that fuel?" She rounded on him. "From a lawful source." "That is not an answer. It is the only answer you need." Then the tree line exploded with light. 4 security lamps snapped on at once, bleaching the field from 3 different angles. Vivian threw up an arm. Grant stumbled backward, and the young cameraman nearly dropped his equipment. For a second, all 4 of them stood exposed in the open mud, every can, bag, shovel, and footprint visible as clearly as noon. Walter emerged from the trees wearing work pants, rubber boots, and a brown bathrobe over a flannel shirt. A professional camera hung from his neck. A small audio recorder was clipped to his chest, and an old double-barrel shotgun rested open across one arm. The barrels pointed at the ground, but nobody misunderstood the message. "Evening," he called. Or morning, I suppose. Hard to tell when people are committing crimes before breakfast. Vivian's face emptied. "Walter," she said. He kept walking. "Mrs. Crowley, you look different on infrared." Grant stared at the camera. "What is that?" "Evidence," Walter said. 3 fixed cameras, 1 thermal unit, 2 directional microphones, and 49 minutes of your best decision-making. The younger man stopped recording. Vivian recovered first. She always did. "This is illegal surveillance," she said. Walter smiled. "You entered private land without permission, in plain view of the owner's property line, while discussing your plan at conversational volume. You might want a lawyer before you start teaching me surveillance law." She pointed at the shotgun. "Are you threatening us?" "No. If I were threatening you, I would not have broken it open. I brought it because we have coyotes and fools in the field tonight, and I was not sure which one would run first." Ed sank down onto an overturned bucket and covered his face. Grant looked at Vivian with naked panic. "You told us Nolan had been dumping chemicals for months. You told us the samples were already positive." Vivian's eyes flashed. "They are positive. They will be by morning." Silence spread across the field. Walter slowly turned his head toward me, then back to her. "There it is," he said. Vivian realized what she had admitted and tried to claw it back. "I meant the county will confirm the contamination." "Of course you did." Walter lifted the recorder slightly. "For clarity, would that be before or after the part where you told Ed to pour the fuel closer to the water table so the damage would appear worse?" Grant made a sound like air leaving a tire. Ed began to cry. The cameraman stepped away from Vivian and whispered, "Aunt Viv, you said this was staged for documentation." She slapped the side of his camera down. "Stop filming." Walter laughed softly. "No need. Mine has been running since 2:37. Vivian looked from him to me, then toward the open gate as if calculating distance. Walter noticed. "State police are already on the way," he said. She froze. "You called local law enforcement," she said. "No," Walter replied. "I called people you do not play tennis with." That finally cracked a group. The cameraman turned and ran for the fence, leaving one shoe in the mud. Grant started talking all at once, claiming he had believed there was an official emergency order. Ed raised both hands and said he would tell the truth. Vivian stood alone in the center of the field, breathing hard, the fuel can still hanging from her fingers. She looked at me, and for the first time there was no polished civic concern, no binder, no practiced smile, just contempt. "You ruined this place," she said. "Before you, this could have been beautiful." I looked around at the poisoned trench, the torn fence, and the salt scattered over living soil. "It was beautiful," I said. "You just could not stand that it did not belong to you." Her jaw tightened. "Those houses represent families, investments, stability. Your farm is mud and fungus and rot." "No, Vivian," I said, stepping close enough that she had to look up at me. "This farm is life breaking down and becoming life again. You are the only thing here trying to turn it into poison." Blue light flickered through the trees before she could answer. Then came the low growl of engines on the gravel road. One vehicle, then another, then a third. Walter leaned against the hood of my truck and took a sip from a thermos he had somehow carried through all of it. "Best part," he murmured, "is when people who think they control the story meet someone with body cameras." Vivian set the fuel can down very carefully, as if neatness still mattered, and turned toward the approaching troopers with her chin raised. I had seen that posture at county meetings, at my gate, across the road during inspections. It was the posture of a woman who had always believed confidence could substitute for innocence. By sunrise, she would find out exactly how expensive that mistake could be. The first trooper out of the lead SUV was a woman named Dana Ruiz, compact, calm, and carrying the kind of authority that did not need to announce itself. She took one look at the cut chain, the fuel cans, the open trenches, and the four muddy people standing where they had no business standing. Then asked a very simple question. "Who owns this property?" I raised my hand. Vivian raised hers too, not because she owned anything, but because she could not tolerate an empty space where her voice might fit. "We are representatives of the adjoining community," she said. "We responded to an environmental emergency." Ruiz looked at her gloves, then at the red stains on them. "Is that why you were holding agricultural diesel?" Vivian answered before thinking. "We found it here." Walter cleared his throat from beside my truck. "Trooper, I have video of her carrying that can through the gate at 2:43. Ruiz turned toward him. "And you are?" "Walter Keene. Witness, neighbor, retired." "Retired what?" Walter took another drink of coffee. "Mostly tired." Even Ruiz almost smiled. Then she separated everyone. That was when the whole thing began to collapse. Not dramatically at first, but the way an old shed gives in after years of rot, one board at a time. Ed lasted maybe 4 minutes before he told them Vivian had threatened to cancel every maintenance contract he had in Maple Crest if he refused to help. Grant lasted 10. He claimed he thought they were conducting lawful inspection, which was hard to sell with a shovel in his hands and bolt cutters in the back of his SUV. Vivian held out the longest. She demanded an attorney, threatened to sue Walter for surveillance, accused me of intimidation, and told Ruiz she would be hearing from important people in the county. Ruiz listened patiently, then said, "Mrs. Crowley, the important people can call the station. Tonight you are going with us." When the cuffs went on, Vivian stared at me with such pure hatred that for 1 second I forgot to feel victorious. I just felt tired. My field smelled like fuel. The fungal beds along the creek were already dying, and dawn was turning the sky gray over land I had spent years bringing back to life. There is a strange thing about finally winning a fight you never wanted. Relief comes mixed with grief, because justice can stop the person holding the knife, but it cannot always put the blood back where it came from. Walter must have seen something on my face, because he walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Soil recovers," he said. "People too sometimes." Then he looked toward Vivian being placed in the cruiser. "Some people just become evidence." The investigation continued until nearly 8 in the morning. State environmental officers arrived, photographed the contaminated areas, collected samples, and ordered an emergency remediation plan. I sat on my porch with Walter, drinking coffee that tasted like burned rope, when my laptop chimed inside the house. An email had arrived from Vivian, copied to the county commission, the state environmental office, a regional news station, and half the residents of Maple Crest. The subject line read, "Urgent toxic waste discovery at Mercer Agricultural Site." She had scheduled it to send automatically at 8. The message described a courageous early morning inspection by HOA volunteers who had supposedly discovered long-term chemical dumping near a shared watershed. Attached were photographs of the trenches after they had poured the fuel but before I arrived. One image even showed Grant pointing solemnly at the blackened soil like a man unveiling a war crime. The timestamps were perfect. So perfect they proved the entire scene had been staged before any authorities were contacted. I forwarded everything to my attorney, Hannah Price, who normally handled commercial land disputes and had once described homeowners associations as tiny governments run by people rejected from actual politics. She called me 30 seconds later. "Nolan," she said, breathing hard with excitement. "Do not touch anything." She scheduled the confession. Over the next few months, the criminal case grew teeth. Vivian was charged with felony property damage, conspiracy, unlawful dumping, and attempted evidence fabrication. Grant accepted a deal and testified against her. Ed cooperated fully and avoided jail, though he lost most of his contracts. Vivian's nephew turned over the original camera card, which contained footage of her directing every step. But the bigger revelation came during a civil lawsuit. Hannah subpoenaed the HOA emails and found a chain of messages between Vivian and a developer named Clark Danner, the same man who had built Maple Crest. Danner wanted my 12 acres for a second phase of luxury homes, but I had refused every offer. In one email, he promised Vivian a consulting fee and a percentage of the acquisition if she could create enough regulatory pressure to force me into a distress sale. That was the moment everything made sense. The complaints, the inspections, the rumors about contaminated water, the obsession with my property values, none of it had been about protecting families. Vivian had been trying to poison my reputation before she poisoned my land. The story hit the local news 2 days after the emails became public. The headline called it the Midnight Farm Plot, which sounded more charming than felony dumping deserved. But it spread fast. Residents who had defended Vivian began bringing us boxes of records. They showed fines for unapproved flower pots, telling threats, selective enforcement, and private messages where she referred to certain homeowners as problems to be disciplined. The entire board resigned within a week. The HOA insurer refused to cover intentional criminal acts, which meant Vivian and the others were personally exposed. She eventually pleaded guilty to 1 felony count and several misdemeanors, received probation, community service, and a restitution order large enough to erase most of what she owned. My civil case settled for just over $240,000, including remediation costs, lost research contracts, and damages. Vivian sold her house 6 months later. I watched the moving truck pull away from Maple Crest on a cold November afternoon. She drove past my gate without looking over. I thought I would feel satisfied, maybe even triumphant. But all I felt was the quiet that comes after heavy machinery shuts down. We used part of the settlement to rebuild a mushroom lab, restore the creek bank, and install a new camera system Walter called adequate, which from him was high praise. Along the boundary, I planted a thick wall of hawthorn, elderberry, and native blackberry. Within 2 years, it was tall enough to hide every beige rooftop in Maple Crest. The new HOA president, a soft-spoken electrician named Owen Brooks, came over one Saturday with a 6-pack and a bag of grass seed. He apologized on behalf of the neighborhood, then asked if I could help him grow better tomatoes. That felt like a better ending than any courtroom judgment. Walter refused every dollar I offered him. He said watching Vivian explain a fuel can to state police was payment enough, though I did buy him a new thermal camera for Christmas. He complained for 10 minutes, then mounted it before dinner. I still worked those fields at night sometimes, turning compost beneath the security lights, listening to insects and the creek moving through the dark. I used to think ownership meant a deed, a fence, and the confidence that nobody could take what was yours. Now I know it also means vigilance, records, good neighbors, and the courage to turn around when your instincts tell you something is wrong. Some people told me I should have accepted a private settlement and spared Vivian the public humiliation. Others said I should have pushed for prison. So tell me what you think. Did I take it too far by destroying her reputation and financial future? Or did she earn every consequence the moment she tried to frame an innocent man and poison living soil for money? Leave your answer in the comments. Share this story with someone who has dealt with a controlling neighbor or an abusive HOA, and tell me where you draw the line between forgiveness and accountability.